Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share the episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. There is so much to talk about on this Friday, so if you will forgive me, I'm going to use a bit of a scattergun approach. The first issue is the decision which will be made by Donald Trump, whether or not to invoke the Insurrection Act. He is threatening to invoke that 1807 law and deploy troops to quell those demonstrations taking place in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The threat comes as this tension escalates. And let me point out, this is not just Minnesota. We heard Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, speak about what's happening in LA. There is a fear abroad in the land, and I want to be very clear about this. Whether you support Trump or oppose Trump, there is a fear abroad in the land at the thought that ICE agents might be used to police the streets. But further than that, can you imagine our military on the streets of major American cities? Now, I was in Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots. I happened to be speaking and spent an evening or two with people involved in what was going on in Los Angeles. There was a reason why the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles requested that there be military on the streets of LA. But do you understand that in this case, it's very different? There is opposition, loud opposition, both on the state and local level, to the use of American military forces on the streets of America. It would seem to me that if the President of the United States believes in local policing, he would be backing up the Minnesota police. He would be backing up the Los Angeles police. He would be not suggesting that the federal government become involved in law enforcement. Now, let's remember that when this Insurrection Act was imposed during the Rodney King riots, there was a precedent. In 1958, President Eisenhower invoked this act in order to ensure that children would be integrated into Little Rock schools. That made sense. But what this president is proposing is, to me, appalling. It's scary. It's something that all of us should be aware of. And I want to point out that the leadership in Minnesota, the governor, the mayor, others, have said, we don't want violence in our city. But what is provoking the violence? The violence is being provoked by the fact that Donald Trump has sent ICE forces in. Now, I've been carefully looking into the question of ICE training. And the simple fact is, we talked about this long ago, that Donald Trump was going to suggest, if you're interested in joining ICE, go ahead. There were no conditions, and the training period is even shorter. And there is no doubt that the people joining ICE for federal government protection now feel that they can act with impunity. No, there is something wrong with this picture. Something terribly wrong. And I am concerned because as the weekend approaches, there will be more demonstrations in St. Paul and in, of course, the place where it's all happening, in fact, Minnesota itself. Minneapolis is the center of all of this, and I want to be very clear that what is happening now should scare every American. The Attorney General of Minnesota said he would challenge any action in court. But you and I know it takes the courts time to decide. And that means that the action being taken, will happen if the president demands it. And there is one other point, and that is that the odds are that whatever the president asks for, the courts are going to uphold. Because under the Insurrection Act, the president is given long range latitude to do what he thinks may be necessary. I say this regretfully, but I believe that the American people need to be afraid. The idea that a president could threaten to quash legitimate protests by sending troops, federal troops, anywhere in the country is to me disturbing. And I want to point something out. And I know some of you will not be happy with me for doing it. But we had an insurrection in this country on January 6th. And did the President of the United States, Donald Trump, invoke the Insurrection Act to restore order? No. All he did was talk about the peaceful protesters who came to Washington, D.C. No, there is something fundamentally wrong here, and we'd better discuss it and understand it. Now, there was another incident that I have to reflect on, and that is Machado's trip to the White House to see Donald Trump. Now, I don't know who Donald Trump will ultimately choose to be the leader of Venezuela, but I do know that Machado did something that to me was just appalling. She took the Nobel Peace Prize, which she won, and she brought it with her to the White House, and she presented it to Donald Trump. Now, let's be clear. The Nobel Committee has made it absolutely clear that you cannot give your prize to someone else. Machado is the Nobel laureate. Donald Trump is not the Nobel laureate. But can you imagine the President of the United States allowing such a transfer, a gift to be given? To me, it reveals so much about Donald Trump, who he is, what he is. We need to understand that European troops have arrived in Greenland. Now, it's true talks are going on, but it's also true that when you have European nations sending troops to Greenland, they are not doing it as an act of anything more or less than to send a message to Donald Trump. This is unacceptable. When you have France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Norway, Sweden, and the Netherlands starting to send troops, it's symbolism, of course, but this is something we need to understand very clearly. There is a danger in the world, and the danger in the world is being caused by Donald Trump. By the way, under the treaty we have with Greenland, we can put any troops in that we want. There is no need for this action, just as there is no need for what Donald Trump is doing in Minnesota, and perhaps, if he so chooses, in other places. Now let's turn to Iran. What has happened is that the president has sort of stepped back, but he is warning Iran that all options are on the table. We have increased our troop movement in the Middle East. And this, my friends, is something that should affect all of us, which we should all be considering, that we should all be thinking about, because, frankly, again, it scares me. But there is another matter in the news which most people are not discussing, and I want to talk about it with you. There's so many headlines, it's a real problem to decide what to do. President Trump has outlined his health plan. You and I know that the costs of health are rising, in part because no subsidy deal has been assigned yet to Obamacare, ACA. The deadline passed, and no action has been taken by Congress. So President Donald Trump announced yesterday his outline for a health care plan. And let me explain to you what the health care plan fundamentally is. He's saying, rather than giving money to insurance companies, we're going to give money to people directly. Let them buy what they want. This is a disaster for American health. Just as surely as George W. Bush's desire to make Social Security voluntary would have been a disaster. Remember, George Bush said, we're going to give you back your money. You can invest it where you want. Can you imagine if when that had happened, people had taken the stock that was hot in those days, Enron, and put their money in Enron? This should not be a gamble. This should be guaranteed. And this is what the president said. The government is going to pay the money directly to you. Do you understand what a ridiculous concept this is? And what Donald Trump went on to say is very clear. It goes to you, and then you take the money and buy your own health care. Let me explain to you, this is ripe for disaster. The fact that the ACA healthcare plan deadline has passed and there is no government subsidy, and yet, and I want to make this clear, the money Donald Trump has been spending on so many other things, including ICE, could all be spent legitimately to subsidize healthcare in this country. I want you to understand something. I am not opposed to the idea of a national healthcare plan. In fact, I think it's necessary. Donald Trump's idea is a direct reflection of the plan floated by Republican senators last year. It's not going to pass. It's not going to be approved. And to put it very simply, what Donald Trump has done to our health care with massive cuts, and all you have to do is take a look at what health care has meant under Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to understand what a disaster the president's health care plan might be. I want you to know that the White House also indicated that Trump's plan would codify his efforts to lower drug prices by tying prices to the lowest price paid by other countries. There are many flaws in Donald Trump's plan. The fact that there is a plan is nothing less than a miracle. But it's time for the Senate and the House to stand up and just say no. And let me tell you what I really believe. The Republicans are scared. They are scared that they are going to lose their majorities in the House and in the Senate. And in a sense, without any doubt, that would cripple Donald Trump on so many different levels. Whether it's his health plan, whether it's ACA, whether it's on foreign policy. Remember that just the other day, as we talked about yesterday, there was an attempt to limit the Senate to limit the president's power when it comes to foreign adventures, the War Powers Act. There was a tie vote in the United States Senate, and it was J.D. Vance who broke the tie. If the Democrats take control of the Senate, J.D. Vance won't have to break any ties. That'll be it. And of course, in the House, we have seen the complete abdication of responsibility by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. This is a time of testing for America and a time of choosing. And I want you to understand clearly that in November, the American people will have a clear choice, a choice between Donald Trump and the Republicans and what the Democrats are trying to do. I don't know in the end what will happen, but I do know that if you take a look at the president's popularity right now, down in the 30s, it is a stunning reversal of Donald Trump's popularity. And that, to me, is critical as well. There are many issues which we could have talked about this morning, and there will be many more issues that we will encounter this weekend and in the weeks ahead. But one thing I can guarantee you, on Around the Political World with John Rothman, you're going to get blunt talk. What we used to call off the bark, unvarnished. My appraisal of where this country is going scares me. It scares me having been involved for years in politics. It is time for the courts to act and maybe by next week, we'll have a ruling on the tariff question. And if the Supreme Court rules as it should against tariffs, well, it'll be a big blow to Donald Trump and what I consider to be his abuse of power. I got a call from a friend of mine who's very active in national Democratic politics. And he said, what is the argument we should be using now against Donald Trump? And my answer was, and is, blatant abuse of power. The American people need to stand up. The courts need to stand up. We all need to make clear that abuses of power by the President of the United States are not going to be accepted. Pure and simple. If my message to you today sounds harsh, well, it's the truth. Off the bark. And that is what I try to give you every day on Around the Political World with John Rothman. Of course, we're taking the weekend off. Can you imagine on Monday, and we will be here on Monday, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. Can you imagine what we'll be talking about on Monday? I can hardly wait. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write me a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and, well, click any of the links to the show notes to connect with me on social media. Remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. I'll be back on Monday, and believe me, I can't wait. I do want to point out this show has been getting such positive attention that we are excited to bring on advertising support. I'm delighted to tell you I'm happy, I hope you're happy, and I hope our advertisers are happy. My special appreciation to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I will be back with Gogo on Monday. Have a great weekend and a great celebration of Dr. King. Until Monday, have a great time, and we'll continue to watch the news, and I know you will too.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.